Hi, good afternoon, or I guess it's still morning. My name is Jenelle Riley. I'm an editor of Variety. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the SAG Foundation conversation with Carey Mulligan. This is an actress who really, just in the last few years, has emerged as one of our most interesting and reliable presences on screen. She is, of course, an Oscar nominee for her work in An Education, and just this year received a Tony nomination for her work in the Broadway play Skylight. Right now, of course, she is currently appearing on screens in Suffragette, which you should all go to on Sunday. Please join me in welcoming Carey Mulligan. Also, on a superficial note, can you see those shoes? Those are the greatest shoes I've ever. I made everyone stand up. Sorry.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about like your serious, amazing acting, and I just have to point them out. And the shoes. Now that that's out of the way, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is so nice.
Congratulations on not just a great movie, but a really great year. You've had two fantastic movies out this year.
Thanks.
Far from the Maddening Crowd. Yeah, it's
nice.
really good. And obviously the run on Broadway. I mean, everything at once. How's it feel?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's been it's sort of how it works, or has worked with me, that I take, before I did Maddening Crowd, I took a year and a half off because the right thing didn't come along, and then these things all came in quick succession. So so it was sort of, Maddening Crowd, Suffragette, and Skylight in London and New York all happened very quickly. So it's nice now to be on holiday, sort of.
It's kind of unheard of to hear actors talk about time off. I mean, was it an issue of you're waiting for the right project, or?
Yeah, I mean, and before that, I'd done a kind of run of work, Shame and Gatsby, and a play in New York, and so it had been quite intense. And then I stopped, and it just wasn't the right thing kind of coming up. So I was just waiting for kind of a good, and then all these great things came along very quickly in a row, which was very lucky.
So this is a SAG audience of other fellow actors. So I always like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card? Because obviously you were working in England before making films here.
My first job was, I had a really, really small part in Brothers, the Jim Sheridan film. I had a scene with Natalie Portman. So that was the first time. And I was in a bit more of it, and I got cut out of a bit of it. But I was there for months. Jim Sheridan just kept me in New Mexico for months, and I was living in this. I was living in a Holiday Inn on the freeway, and taking the bus down to Santa Fe and back, and like just trying to fill my time. I had nothing to do, but that was how I got my card.
That's the glorious Hollywood life. You come here, and sit in New Mexico.
Yeah,
that was before An Education.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Because you had actually done quite a bit of work.
Yeah, I'd done, lots of television in England, and theatre, but An Education was the first lead role I had in a film,
So I do want to go back to the beginning. I know you were born and raised in London, and I think you were active in school plays.
Yeah, I did all that stuff,
When did you know this was something you wanted to do for a career?
I think when I knew that it was a career. You don't really think of it as being a career when you're little. And then when I went to New York when I was 14 with my mum to go and see some plays, and I saw Molly Ringwald and Alan Cumming in Studio 54 in Cabaret.
I saw that show.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah.
And I had a Cosmopolitan
at 14.
At 14, because I'm English and we don't take it that seriously. And watched with my mum, and that was kind of the first time I thought, I want to do this properly for a living. And I also saw Kevin Bacon in a play at the Walter Kerr Theatre. And I can't remember the name of the play, but it was a one-man show. And then when I went back years later to do The Seagull, it was in the Walter Kerr. So it was very kind of cyclical and crazy.
And then I've heard this story, and I just have to, clarify if it's true, because it's either the greatest urban legend ever, or it's true, that you wrote a letter to Kenneth Branagh.
I did.
God.
Yeah.
After seeing him in a show?
Yeah, I saw him in Henry. In Stratford, and he's always been. He's the best actor on the planet, and when it comes to Shakespeare, he's no one else can kind of do it like him, bar probably Mark Rylance, and so I just was in love with him. He was probably my childhood crush, if I had any.
He's my adult crush. So I get it,
fair enough. And so yeah, I wrote to him and said like, oh, I really want to be an actor, and I don't know, my parents aren't that crazy about the idea, and I don't really know how to get into it, and should I be an actor? And he wrote back. Well, he didn't write back. This is where this story has gotten slightly confused. His assistant wrote back, which then translated to the press as his sister. And I don't even know if he has a sister, but poor Kenneth. Yeah, said, you know, if Kenneth feels that if there's nothing else that you can do, if there's anything else that you can do, you should do that. But if you feel it's the only thing you can do, you should do it. But the letter that really sort of, you know, the kind of extraordinary luck that I had was writing to Julian Fellowes, who I'd met briefly at my school and who introduced me to a number of people, and also introduced me to the casting director's assistant, who was meeting lots and lots of young girls to play the sisters in Pride and Prejudice.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So this is foreign to us in today's day and age. This is an actual letter, like written by hand?
Actual, yeah. Yeah.
And how did you know where to send it to?
I got his address off, my headmistress knew him from my school. So I got his address off her and wrote to him.
And did Julian Fellowes actually discourage you a little bit?
He did. He told me if I wanted to be an actress, I should marry a banker. At first,
yeah,
and then after that, he was very encouraging. And but that was his initial piece of advice, which is pretty solid. But yeah, and then later. I went and then when I wrote to him really in earnest about it, then he took it very seriously.
And was it, I heard him or his wife invited you to a dinner party?
It was both of them, yeah. And I think they'd got lots of letters from, you know, kind of desperate people like me, and they were all there, you know, so there were like 10 of us, and they just thought like, let's get this done in one go. And so we all, you know, they kind of doled out advice to each person, and it was great. They you know, they introduced me to this, you know, theatre workshop in London at the Riverside Studios, and you know, I'd never acted with anyone who wasn't, you know, pretty much a girl. I'd never acted with men. I'd never acted with anyone who wasn't from, you know, my life, and so I got to act with all sorts of different people and different ages and boys and girls, and that was really helpful. And then later I did this audition for Pride and Prejudice.
So that was your first time in front of a camera, Pride and Prejudice?
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a debut.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that process?
So much. I mean, it was amazing. It was like, you know, such a dream experience. It was 11 weeks, and you know, we were all staying in lovely country estates, and we were all kind of between the age of 18 and 25, and having so much fun and having parties and jumping in lakes and, you know, all this kind of fun stuff. It was great. I had no idea what I was doing, but I loved it, all of it. It was amazing.
How did you get the part? I mean, was there an audition process?
Yeah, so I went and met, Gina J was casting it, but she was over in LA meeting, you know, sort of, and so her assistant was putting lots and lots of girls on tape. And I think Joe had asked to see, you know, girls who hadn't been in professional productions before, so they didn't feel kind of, he wanted people who hadn't really acted very much. And so I did an audition for Robin, who was the assistant, and he really helped me because I was obviously used to doing quite theatrical things, and he kept on sort of cutting and telling me to make it smaller and smaller and smaller, which was very good advice.
And you were, I think, around 19 at this time?
I was 18, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, handling rejection at any age is tough, so I don't know, was this your first audition?
Yeah.
Okay, and you booked it?
Yeah.
Okay, so no problem.
Yeah, but then I have many, many, many rejections to follow, but yeah, I was lucky on that one.
I mean, it is tough, like I said, at any age. I mean, at such a young age, how did you deal with it?
I mean, I just sort of kind of couldn't believe my luck, so I was quite happy, and I didn't expect much to come of it. I thought, you know, I'll be in this film and that'll be nice, but I didn't imagine it would kind of lead to a career, so I kind of was trying to enjoy it for what it was, as opposed to getting attached to the idea of being, you know, in the business.
And you mentioned that your parents were not thrilled with you becoming an actor, or
no.
concerned is a better word.
Yeah, exactly.
How do they feel about it now?
Yeah, they're very supportive. I mean, you know, it's all the reasons that you would be nervous of your, you know, son or daughter becoming an actor, which are very understandable. But at the time, I just thought they were horrible people and they didn't understand my passion and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But obviously in retrospect you think, yeah, of course.
And now that they get to meet Meryl Streep, they're like, okay,
now
this
they're
worked
fine
out.
about it. Yeah. Yeah.
So after Pride and Prejudice, I know you did you did the very acclaimed miniseries Bleak House.
Yeah.
You did Doctor Who,
Yeah.
which is pretty much the coolest thing ever. And you started doing a lot of theater as well.
Yeah.
I mean, did you imagine your career as a theater actress? Did you always want to do everything?
No, I imagined when I was growing up doing theatre. I didn't really grow up very much with film, not really in the house or anything like that. So musical theatre was where I wanted to be. But I realised quite quickly that you had to be pretty good to be. So I kind of got more interested in normal straight theatre. And so that's kind of what I always pictured I would end up doing, or hoped that I would end up doing if I got into it.
And obviously you got to get back on stage just this year.
Yeah.
What is it about the live theater experience that, I don't know if it's your favorite medium or...
It's funny, it's sort of, it's such an embarrassment of riches really, because when you're doing, you know, when you're filming you go, oh God, I can't wait to do a play, you know, and then it's vice versa, you know, it's the same kind of, I think that what I really like about theatre is going out and being completely blinded by lights and no one can tell me to stop. And I kind of, you know, that feeling of not being, I get, you know, I can get a bit kind of nervous about crew and, not crew, but, you know, I get kind of, well, there's too many people around, I find it quite hard to concentrate. So I try and, you know, sort of just focus and be a professional. But on stage it's so much easier in a way. I kind of find it much easier just to block everything out and you run and go. And I like that, you know, you kind of have to just constantly fix things. And, you know, if it's not going well, you have to try and get it back onto the right course, and there's no cutting and there's no, that's sort of exciting.
I know you mentioned that you, I don't know if you want to say took classes, but you were studying with some people, but by a very young age, you were doing some really intense roles. I mean, you were doing the Seagull, you know, you were doing Dickens and Jane Austen. Do you continue to study with someone? Do you ever have to, you know, turn to a coach to help you with certain roles?
No, I never took any. I really wanted to go to drama school. I didn't get in, but I was, but was totally understandable because I was so ridiculously out of my depth. And I, you know, I was 17 years old and I was trying to do these very serious Sarah Kane monologues about suicide, and you know, and I'd come from this like incredibly well-adjusted, lovely house, and you know, they could see straight through me, and they were like, "Go away and like live a little bit." So it was fair enough. But no, I never took any classes. But I did I did have amazing people to work with. You know, the directors that I worked with, you know, knew that I had no idea what I was doing and were very generous with their time. And particularly Ian Rickson, who I did The Seagull with in London and New York, was, you know, he was kind of probably the most kind of influential in terms of how I work and how he helped me kind of come up with a way of working, which thus far I didn't have. I just sort of made it up as I went along.
And I know the original production of The Seagull co-starred Chiwetel Ejiofor and Kristen Scott Thomas.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to imagine you learned a lot just from working with heavyweights like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing, and such intense scenes, especially with Chiwetel. And Kristen, but and Mackenzie Crook as well, who was really extraordinary in that play, and we also did it in New York together. And then Peter Sarsgaard came and took on the role that Chiwetel was doing in London, so that was really cool.
And when you moved to New York, I know that you received a Drama Desk Award nomination, but you lost to this up-and-comer Angela Lansbury.
I know.
Do you remember that experience? I mean,
I remember thinking, who the hell is Angela Lansbury? Yeah, no, not really. I mean, that kind of, I think that all happened once we'd left. The production, is still probably, you know, one of my top 2 experiences ever. I loved it so much, and I, you know, it was a 16-week run, and I genuinely wanted to carry on, and I think, you know, that sort of says so much about the script and the people, and, you know, I loved it, every second of it.
People always ask this, and I understand why it's confusing, but how do you keep a performance like that fresh every night?
Sometimes it's not. I think, I mean, that was so special because I just loved that character and that relationship, and a lot of it was to do with Mackenzie, and that he was so, as Kostya, he was just so real and fragile and emotionally kind of available, and so kind of working with him, we were so in love with that story, and, you know, and the sort of tragedy of it, and so I think, yeah, and sort of I have this sort of book that I make for most of the jobs that I do, and I try and read something new every day, like read or listen to new music or listen to something that, and then try and find something from that song or that poem or that book that can feed into that evening.
Oh wow, what did you listen to a lot for The Seagull?
Gosh, I listen to a lot of an Irish folk artist called Kate Rusby, who does lots of folk songs. They're all kind of lots of songs about, there's one called Young James, which is about someone that, she's in love with that kind of left her. And I mean, there's lots and lots of things. I used to run around backstage before I did The Seagull listening to a song and pretending to be on a horse because I had to come onto the stage having sort of raced from my father's house on a horse to get there and being very breathless, and I come on, I'm like, oh, I'm not late, am I? I know I'm not late, and all of this sort of stuff. And so I used to run up and down. I mean, I wasn't like doing this, but I was racing, I was kind of running, and there was all these stairs backstage, so I'd run from my dressing room, which was on the top floor, all the way down to the basement where the costumes were, and then all the way back up again, and then outside, and then I had to go out into the fire escape, climb up to the fire escape, say hello to my grandfather, and then run back down and run back on stage, and that was my thing. And if I didn't do it, I mean, I don't think I ever didn't do it.
I mean, was it, to be breathless or was it also sort of superstition?
It turned into a bit of a ritual,
yeah.
But it was to be breathless initially, and then it turned into it had to be part of the show, yeah.
And your co-stars just knew, stay clear.
Stay the hell out of the way. Yeah. I did some spectacular falls onto stage sometime, like a couple of nights.
Well, I was actually going to ask because I can't imagine that was safe.
I'm wearing a full-length dress and a corset and high heels. Well, not high heels, but the kind of shoes that they used to wear. So I fell over a lot. But I would fall over a lot. So,
so I think you came to a lot of our attention here in the States with 2009's An Education. Such a beautiful film. You mentioned it was your first lead role. I don't even know how old you were at the time. I know it was very young.
I was 22 or 23, I can't remember, when I filmed it, and then when it came out, 24.
I mean, were you familiar with the book it was based on? Is it something
Well, it was based on a memoir, so it was sort of a 6-page article in a magazine, in a literary magazine, Granta. So I just read that and then read the script, and actually didn't really have anything to do with Lynn Barber, who it was based on, throughout the whole process. She came to the set one day, but she kind of stayed away from the whole thing.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you go about winning the role?
Well, it was sort of one of those films that you think is never going to get made. So it kind of happened over about 2 years, and it had a different director initially, and then it was called The Time of Her Life. Which is such a bad title. And then finally it came back round and they wanted me to audition for Helen, which was Rosamund Pike's role eventually. And I don't think I did, but it was kind of one of those things that just went on. And then finally Lone Scherfig came on the project, and then it all happened quite fast.
I mean, was it an audition or did she know your work?
Oh yeah, no. It was probably 4 or 5, I think.
I was going to say, I have to imagine every young actress, British and American, was going after this part.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was just such a long, protracted process. So I think they just saw tons of people, and and then some people probably were doing other things. It was one of those really long things. So, and then it all came together. I think they suddenly got the financing, and it was like, go.
And was it nerve-wracking, waiting to hear, or you said that you kind of never thought it would really happen, so maybe you just weren't thinking about it?
Yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't one of those things that you were waiting for your agent to call, because we would talk about it every couple of months. It was one of those kind of jobs, so it wasn't that kind of process.
And then to get to work with Peter Sarsgaard, who I imagine you already have this amazing chemistry and history with.
Yeah.
That must have helped immensely.
Yeah, well, we were doing An Education when they offered him The Seagull, so we did it that way around. Yeah, I mean, he's just the best and the coolest guy ever, and so much fun, and and that role was so hard. I think it was just such a difficult, he walked such a fine line with that character, because it was just, some of the stuff that happens in the film is properly dodgy, and and you don't kind of hate him, you kind of love him still, and you feel for him, and I think that's so difficult.
Where did that film premiere? When did you first see it?
I saw it in Sundance, yeah.
Okay, because I remember reading about the premiere and the rapturous response that started receiving at festivals. So the first time seeing it with an audience, were you prepared for that?
I don't actually remember it being like a big deal in the room. You know, I remember the week in Sundance, and suddenly, you know, someone was going to buy it, and we were like, "What?" You know, it was all of that was exciting. But I don't remember the room being a particularly. Really? But I remember reviews coming in and everyone around us being very excited by that.
See, I heard about these amazing standing ovations, and
I don't remember that. I mean, I think you know, I was terrified the whole time, so I think I was probably just sinking into my seat.
I mean, was it difficult? This is your first lead role. You're in every scene of the movie.
Oh, it's such a hard watch, you know. I remember actually calling my mum. The first time I saw it, and I saw it on my own in a screening room, was here in LA, and it was a week before Sundance. And I saw it, and I came out, and I just sobbed, and I called her, and I was like, "Mum, it's so boring," and like nothing happens, and my face doesn't move, and I don't do anything, and you know, I was completely devastated, and I was like, they're going to hate it, and I want to come home. And, you know, so just, but that's, you know, I think that's just a lot of watching yourself. And I'd only ever been kind of in and out, and I'd never been like much in things, you know.
And your mother, who really didn't want you to become an actress, how did she respond to that?
She was like, well, you've got to go now, haven't you? It's just like, they're going to show it regardless.
That movie really did, I mean, change your career in so many ways with the Oscar nomination. And I think that we've talked before about how you weren't completely comfortable with that attention. Yeah,
I mean, I was, you know, I wasn't expecting anyone to really see it, and you know, and none of the stuff that followed. And I think I just felt sort of like, I was just freaked out by it. I'm not good, you know, I'm fine now, but I was terrible at having my photo taken, and you know, I felt kind of like someone had sort of accidentally invited me to a party that you know, and they were like, "What are you doing here?" And so I kind of walked into every room, and Colin Firth was doing it all for A Single Man, and I knew him. I'd met him years ago. I played a tiny role in a film called When Did You Last See Your Father that he was in, and so I'd met him, and so I kind of latched onto him and his wife everywhere, and I'd kind of like grip onto his arm as we walked into rooms and be like, "Don't introduce me to anyone. I don't want to meet anyone. I just want to sit in the corner." It was a funny thing, and I wish I'd enjoyed it, because it's such an amazing experience if you can get into it and have fun and just see it for what it is and not take it too seriously.
Do you enjoy it more now?
I mean, I have not done that whole process since, but I do really. I mean, this has been so nice talking about Suffragette, because I love the people that I've made it with, and you know, that's really fun to get to do Q&As with them, and you know, and that sort of stuff is nice.
In addition to changing your life, I know it also changed your career. I mean, do you remember like the difference? Did roles start coming your way?
Yeah, I mean, it was literally kind of from week to week, that I remember the week before knowing that they were making Never Let Me Go, and thinking, oh, well, I'd love to be in that, but you know, there's no. And then straight after Sundance, I met Romanik, and it was it was that kind of thing. Where it's so funny how it happens like that, and so that was amazing, because I really had read that book almost the day it came out. Years before, and really just dreamt about playing that role. So that was kind of amazing.
Was that the first thing you signed on to do after education?
Yeah.
That is a very, very haunting movie.
Yeah.
At the same time, I mean, did you have an American agent at the time?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I had an American agent from when I did The Seagull in London.
Okay. I had to imagine some like big blockbuster movie roles were coming your way. You did do The Great Gatsby, but to choose Never Let Me Go is like actually a very bold choice. Were your agents ever encouraging you to, you know, look at these blockbusters?
No, not really. I mean, I've had the same agent in London since I was 18, who, you know, saw my audition tape for Pride and Prejudice. So we've been together ever since, and we've got very similar sensibilities. And so she's always sort of not pushing, but she's far more interested in plays and good film, and she's not really interested in kind of the stuff that I probably wouldn't be interested in doing.
But I did mention you did do The Great Gatsby. You did a wide variety of roles. You did Drive, you did Shame, obviously Inside Llewyn Davis. How were you sort of choosing your roles at this time?
Well, my agent gave me a really good bit of advice when I was doing Never Let Me Go, because you know, there were kind of, it was sort of an exciting time, and she said, you know, you're in this extraordinary period now, and it may be very brief, but whilst you're in it, you shouldn't take a role unless you can't bear the idea of anybody else doing it. And so that's sort of been my way of working ever since, that, you know, if I read something and I think, oh, it's so great, and I could probably, but like, I wouldn't, if I'm not thinking about it the day after or the week after or the month after, then I sort of tend to not do it. So it's been stuff that I've thought like, oh, it would kill me to see any other actress play this role, because I just want to do it so badly, then I tend to do it.
Those movies I just mentioned all also have really strong auteur directors.
Yeah.
I just have to ask, what's it like to work with the Coen brothers? I've heard so many stories.
Yeah, it's amazing. It was so funny because I went straight from Gatsby, literally from Sydney to New York, and started the next day on the Coen brothers film. So it was a complete, just a different world from Gatsby, which is this huge production, 6 months of filming, and 3 hours in hair and makeup to that film. But yeah, they're the best, and so much fun to work with, and so easy. You finish work by 4 in the afternoon most days.
Really?
Yeah, it was great.
See, I've heard all these various stories about them that kind of contradict each other. Like some people have said, some people have said that like they give no feedback. They give, what they do is they sort of, they'll give you one brilliant thing, per scene pretty much, and it's they kind of take turns in things. But they're very relaxed, and everything's planned out. They know exactly what they've shot the film, they've cut the film before they, so you get at the beginning of the day, you see the shot list, and you see, but exactly the coverage they're going to shoot of you. So if they only need a mid shot, they'll only shoot that. They don't shoot wides for the sake of it. So I think that's why it goes so quickly. But they're just so intelligent. And then they'll just come and give you some like amazing thing or some point of focus, or brilliant. But most of the time, your only kind of encouragement is hearing them laugh from behind the monitor. And everything else is just, then you just move on. I have to imagine it's the greatest sound in the world to hear the Coen brothers laugh. Yeah, and I'd heard them do it loads for Oscar, and I was like, oh, come on. But no, they were so lovely to me, and they gave me, it was such a kind of amazing opportunity to get to play that role, and yeah, I loved it. And you got to sing. I did sing, which is, maybe a musical is in the future. Oh, I think I'd have to do an awful lot of training to try and get good enough to do a musical. Had you met Oscar before that movie? Yeah, Oscar plays my husband in Drive. Right, but so you shot Drive first? We shot Drive first, okay. Yeah, because I sort of like to believe that Drive is like a weird sequel. Yeah. Inside Llewellyn, where the relationship really doesn't work out. Yeah. Oh my God. And what is it, having worked with so many legendary directors, what is it you hope for from a director? Oh, they're also, they've all been so different, but generally somebody that I trust implicitly and that kind of holds everything with a firm hand, and someone that you can collaborate with quite intimately on the whole, but not necessarily. It's just someone that you can look at the end of the day, and if they nod at you, then you're done. I don't need like a massive pat on the back or a kind of cuddle every day, but which is also sometimes nice. But I like kind of just someone who's I know is kind of pushing me as much as I can be pushed, and then knows what they want, and it doesn't let me kind of underperform. Steve Mcqueen was definitely a huge, an unbelievable example of that. He's just he just drives you so much and pushes you so far in the most wonderful and encouraging and loving way. But he just pushes you till your breaking point, and then it's he's just incredible. I talked to so many directors about building this ensemble of actors with so many different styles. But I think it has to be kind of weird for an actor. I have to imagine like Baz Luhrmann and Steve McQueen are wildly different directors, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're actually very similar. Actually, they're kind of, there's a sort of real energy that they both have. They're kind of like, I don't know where they get their reserves of energy from. So in that respect, they're pretty similar. But I think that's the style of the film more than the style of the director. That, Gatsby was a very, was stylized, and Shame was very kind of realistic. That brings us to this year, which I mentioned you already appeared in Far From the Madding Crowd, and of course Skylight. Is there a difference? I know you did Skylight and also The Seagull, first in England before bringing them here. Is there a difference that you can perceive in like European audiences, American audiences? I think American audiences tend to, there's sort of a feeling when you go into a British theatre or when you're on stage that the audience is sort of sitting back, like, all right, what have you got? Quite kind of, and British people are quite reserved in general, so they're not the first to sort of
get excited about things. But the American audiences sort of sit forward and you notice the difference. But that also means that they're much more vocal, which sometimes is great and sometimes is less great. I remember when we did the seagull, Mackenzie would walk on once he's shot the seagull, and he walks on very slowly, and this seagull's sort of dripping with blood, and he presents it to Nina. It's this really awful moment in the play, and this like old biddy in the second row went, "Oh my God, it's a seagull!" And it just killed the moment so badly. And it's that sort of thing where you're like.
Yeah.
But then it's also kind of brilliant,
Yeah.
So you kind of have to love them for it.
I would actually plant her there every night so people know why it's called the seagull.
It's a seagull, yeah.
So didn't get it until then.
Yeah. So funny.
It's killing me that I didn't get to see Mackenzie Crook in this because, we know him from The Office.
Yeah, he's such an extraordinary actor.
Yeah.
But what he does in The Office is so hard. It's really, he doesn't feel like an actor in that. He just feels, they're all incredible in that, but he's just feels like he's that, and he's just could not be further from that character. That's what's so extraordinary.
Oh, thank God.
He's this, he's this incredibly, kind of quite shy, sweet, funny, very humble, and but to play that role, and but he was extraordinary in The Seagull.
So Suffragettes, this is a remarkable story about the British suffragette movement that I guess I'm a little embarrassed to say was not that familiar with. Is this something that is taught in schools?
No.
Really?
I had the same experience. I remember in school, in my history book, there was a paragraph about this big, and it said the women's movement, and it just said, it was led by Emmeline Pankhurst, who's played by Meryl Streep, and it talks about Emily Wilding Davison, and that was it.
That's okay. So now I don't feel as bad.
Yeah, I'm English.
So when you first, was it the script that first came to you?
Yeah.
Or were you surprised to read about the story?
Yeah, massively. I couldn't believe I didn't know more about it. I think I knew that suffragettes had been put in prison for protesting, but I didn't know, the way that they were treated, the police brutality, the abuse, the interrogation, the fact that they were force-fed. That was sort of where force feeding started, and then it was then later used with the IRA in Ireland. But these women were the first prisoners to undergo force feeding in our country.
And I know the script was written by Abby Morgan, who also wrote Shane.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's how it came to you, or it was just usual channels.
It came through usual channels, but I think Abby mentioned that they'd sort of thought about me for a while, which was very lovely. But yeah, it came through my agent, and then I met Sarah pretty quickly after I read it.
And what was it that drew you to the role of Maud? I know she's kind of a composite character of a few real women.
Yeah.
And she's working class. I feel like when we have seen British suffragettes in movies, it's kind of the Mary Poppins mother.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons this story is so appealing. It's it's kind of the women on the ground.
Yeah. First of all, that I didn't know the story. That I didn't know that these women had been through this. And they did such. I remember seeing a photograph of a burnt church. They'd burnt down a church. They blew up houses. They scorched golf greens. They used to go into art galleries and slash famous works of art just to be arrested in protest. It really was kind of such an eye-opener for me. And it was the first time the police used surveillance in our country. So they had cameras, and they were using them for the first time to track people and follow them and photograph them. And then these photos would go in the paper, and they would be used to publicly shame these women. And it was actually one of the first cases of Photoshop, which was I found so extraordinary. So there's a photo that we have of a woman, and she's sort of wincing like this, and she has a scarf around her neck. And then the original photograph exists, and it's a policeman with his arm around her neck, kind of strangling her. And they covered it up so that they could release the photo of this woman. So all of this stuff was just so surprising. And then the role was just so extraordinary. She was just, this completely ordinary woman who was reluctant about all of this and not interested in joining the women's movement and living a very difficult life. And through meeting these women and through becoming a part of this movement, she kind of finds her voice and she becomes extraordinary. And I thought that was a really kind of exciting challenge.
I know all the filmmakers did a lot of research that they provided you with, but where did you even begin?
Yeah, they had a website. They'd done
Really?
because Sarah had been actively trying to make the film for 6 years and talking about it for 10 years. So So they had a website where they started, just because everyone was finding all these incredible things and wanted to share them. So they put a website together where we could download everything. And then when we were in rehearsal, we had tons and tons and tons of books. But you just sort of have to dive in. I mean, we started with, you know, just historically, like what it was like for these women, how they lived, how much money they earned, you know, what they ate, and how, you know, their bodies were affected by the conditions they worked in, which were dire, and all those sorts of things, and then build out from that.
What was something that, or maybe was there anything that you uncovered during your research that you actually like took to the filmmakers and found its way to the film?
Yeah, one of them is actually the voiceover at the end of the film, where Maud's reading this book called Dreams in a Desert, and it says, I hear the sound of feet, thousands and thousands, and they beat this way, lead on. That's from a book called Dreams. And so when I was reading all of this stuff, there was a diary written by this suffragette called Constance Lytton, Lady Constance Lytton. She was a very upper class, very wealthy woman. And she was a suffragette, and she was protesting, and she was arrested and put in prison. And when she was put in prison, she was almost immediately released, even though she went on hunger strike. And she was treated very differently from the working class women. And she found that despicable. And so she disguised herself as a working class suffragette called Jane Wharton, and took on a whole different personality and changed her clothes and changed her voice, and then entered into a protest again and was arrested and was thrown in jail and subsequently force-fed and treated exactly the same as all the other women. And she spent quite a while in jail, and she wrote she wrote a diary while she was in there, and it was really, really helpful for us because it really went through the day-to-day of what it was like to be in there, including being force-fed. And in that, she said that someone had passed her this book, and it was sort of being passed around the women to sort of inspire them. And it had this incredible package. You can look up the whole thing online. It's so beautifully written. We had to shorten it a lot. And there was something about the way that it said, I hear the sound of feet. You know, that there's all these women behind us. There's all this, you know, we're leading this, but there's so much work to do, and there's so many women who are going to follow us, and we just need to lead. That just spoke so much to what we were trying to do with the film, because we wanted it to be a, you know, obviously a salute to these women and say thank you to them for what they did, but also to say this is how much more we have to do to really have equality.
And to have, you know, a mostly female cast. The men in it are wonderful, by the way. Brendan Gleeson and Ben Whishaw are fantastic. But it is, you know, primarily a female cast. You have a female director, female writer, several female producers. Yeah. I mean, was the atmosphere different on set?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was. I hadn't been in a room with that many women since Pride and Prejudice. You know, it was amazing. I'm just always, you know, in rooms with men, and there was something about it. I mean, you know, I've had great experiences with male directors and very, very male crews, but I think, you know, we had a male production design, a female production designer, female costume, female hair and makeup. So it was a big kind of group. But our cinematographer Edu was amazing. He's a dude, so there was one of them around. But there was something about it. I think it felt like, you know, this is such an incredible story, and there's absolutely no reason why it hasn't been told, apart from the fact that it's about women. And that 100 years ago, this happened, and women died, and for us to have our basic right to vote, and for some reason, Hollywood thought that wasn't worth telling. And so we felt, as a group of women, quite proud to be the ones to get to do it.
It also seems to be coming out at a time when, you know, more and more women are speaking up about inequality, be it, you know, equal pay or just basic rights. Yeah. The timing could not be better.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you guys plan this?
For 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. And, you know, we had an election in England this year, so it's a shame the film didn't come out there first, but it's great that it's coming out here. And we've had, you know, responses from girls in England, you know, between 18 and 25 saying, I'll never not use my vote again, having seen the film. And I think, you know, that's sort of a lot of what we were excited about with making the film.
And I think you said that it was your mother who had the idea to cast Meryl Streep as Pankhurst?
Yeah, my mum did.
Your mom who went from not wanting you to be an actor is now a casting director.
To being Meryl Streep's agent. Yeah, exactly. We were walking one day and I was telling her, you know, I just signed on, and we were talking about who was going to play all the dream people, and amazingly, we got the dream people. I mean, I'm talking Brendan Gleeson, you know, Ben Whishaw, Helena, Anne-Marie, you know, sort of amazing. But anyway, none of that had happened yet. And I said, we've got to, you know, we're thinking about who should play Emmeline Pankhurst. And she said, oh, well, it's got to be Meryl Streep. You know, she's the most iconic actress on the planet, and Emmeline Pankhurst was an icon. And I was like, oh, Mum, you're so sweet. You know, Meryl Streep's never going to be in our film, you know, let alone for, you know, a very brief kind of appearance.
Yeah.
And but I mentioned it to Sarah and said, my sweet mum thinks that Meryl Streep should play Emmeline Pankhurst. And then, you know, the idea kind of got talked about, and they kind of worked up the courage to send it to her, and she said yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you tell me you were in the bathtub when you found out that she had signed on?
Yeah.
And you didn't drop your phone?
No, but I did one of those like, oh, you know, kind of like caught it 3 times moments.
And she's been so remarkably supportive.
Oh, she's been unbelievable. But, you know,
be.
she's been an advocate of women's rights her entire career, and so it's been just, and actually it's been really, really great to get to do a bit of press with her and just listen to her talk, because she's just fascinating on it. So that's been really great.
And I love when, you know, Emmeline comes out, you know, to greet this crowd.
Yeah.
You know, the excitement, because I can imagine, like, on the set, it's like, yeah, that's an icon, that's Meryl Streep.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it in the faces of the supporting artists, and I think some of them didn't know that it was going to be Meryl.
Really?
And yeah, so she comes out, and you know, you just see on there. And we shot a bit of that on the first day, and then and we shot Meryl's stuff, and we shot the little scene in between us, and then Meryl was due to leave and go, and then the next day we were going to shoot our coverage. And she found out overnight that they hadn't shot us yet, and we had no dialogue. I mean, it was just a wide shot basically of us staring at her. And she found out overnight that we hadn't done that yet, and she was horrified. And she cancelled her flight, and she changed all of her plans, and was like, I would never want you to think that I wouldn't be there for your coverage. And, you know, so, you know, it's just such a marker of what an extraordinary person she is.
She's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, do you ever have those moments where you're like, that's Meryl Streep, this is so cool?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. Every day.
And for those of you who have seen the movie, I mean, this is a period piece, great costumes, many locations.
Yeah.
And yet it was made on a very shockingly small budget.
Yeah, yeah.
Was it a difficult shoot?
It was quick, and we shot a lot, and we, you know, we were just rolling constantly and resetting, and you know, a lot of it was difficult because we were having big fight scenes and our shirts were getting ripped, and they were a lot of them were original, you know, clothes from, you know, 100 years ago, so they were very fragile. So the costume girls were frantically sewing things up in between takes, and we shot, you know, we were the first film crew in history to be allowed to shoot at the Houses of Parliament. Which is
ironic.
Which is ironic, yeah. We were like, can we do an anti-government protest with horses and women, you know, shouting? And they agreed, which was extraordinary. But yeah, it was difficult, you know. It was with the pace, I think, not for me, but for the director and producers, I'm sure.
What would you say, looking back on your whole career, has been your most difficult role?
This one's up there because, you know, I was so concerned that she felt like a consistent character because she has such a dramatic change, and it's only a 2-hour film, and I didn't want it to seem as if there was one woman who suddenly becomes a different person, as opposed to one consistent personality that just kind of gets enlightened. And yeah, so that probably, and then probably I did a play about 5 or 6 years ago called Through a Glass Darkly, which was an adaptation of Ingmar Bergman movie. And I did it in this tiny space in New York, and that was hard. It was nowhere to hide. It was kind of almost smaller than this, and it was a 1-act play, and she kind of loses her mind through the play, and the nights when it didn't work were so painful. But I loved it, but it was quite hard.
That's the Atlantic Theatre Company,
yeah,
right?
Exactly, yeah.
Great company.
Yeah.
I do want to take some questions from the audience, and I always apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. This is a question from 2 people, Hilty and Riley. That's like a cool cabaret act. When it comes to your approach towards your work, what is the first thing you do when you get a script, and how do you prepare before you come to a table read?
Oh, I'm shockingly bad at table reads. I don't do them. I mean, I do them, I show up, but I kind of like stare at the floor, and my whole face goes red, and I don't act at all. I make a choice to just not act, because I think like half acting is more embarrassing than not. So I'm terrible, and I'm always so impressed by people who can do them. But I guess I just read it as much as I can, and then I did this thing, I guess it's a method, I'm sure if I went to drama school I'd have a name for this, but you know, I start sort of looking at the statements I make about myself, the statements other people make about me, and you know, all of that stuff that's quite kind of clinical, just trying to figure out who the person is. And then often I use tons and tons of poetry. I think mainly to give myself something new to sort of put in that might not be in the page. So a lot of that, but it sort of depends on what it is. But mainly on Suffragette, it was an awful lot of historical research, which was also fascinating and also inspiring, which I think we really needed, just to read about these real women. And then regardless of period, try and take the character out of the period and make it just a person as opposed to a person in whatever outfit that they're wearing.
You talked earlier about music. Was there specific music you used for Suffragette?
Yeah, I listened to a lot of classical music.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to a band called Codaline.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Do you have them here?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I know virtually nothing about music, but yeah, I've seen them on YouTube.
Them, and they had a song called All I Want or something, and that was there was quite a tricky scene with my son in the film that, but when you're working also with a young actor, you don't want to kind of remove yourself that much with music. You want to be able to kind of play with them and hang out. So, but that was the one scene where I didn't hang out with him because it was, it was quite emotional. But so kind of mostly classical on that though.
Do you ever use Mumford & Sons?
No. That could possibly be the most distracting thing. But no, it sort of tends to be, kind of. And usually not classical, usually it's kind of folk music that has some sort of story to it that I can kind of steal things from.
I'm guessing it was folk music during Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yeah. I'm ashamed to say I probably didn't do a huge amount of research for that film because it came straight off the back of Gatsby and I just sort of piled in. But that sort of seemed to play into the whole, the whole kind of environment. And the funny thing about them is they never let me do ADR. And I can hear mistakes in my accent because I'm English, but I can hear them, and they never they were like, oh, we don't need ADR, and I was like, oh, I must have nailed it, and then I heard it, and I was like, oh no, but they did have me come in and do the plane safe version, so you have to go in sometimes and record lines so that they can show it on aeroplanes where they can't show swearing. So they had me come in and instead of saying, can I swear?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Instead of saying fucking, they'd have me go like flipping or something that looked absolutely nothing like the word because they found it so funny. Right. So, if you watch the plain safe version, every time they swear, it doesn't look anything like that. It looks like a real overdub. Anyway, so they let me do that, but for some reason they just didn't think I knew. Anyway, that's another story.
By the way, I can't believe how many people I've met who actually think Llewyn Davis was a real person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they want to know what happened to him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he is quite closely based on Dave Van Ronk, but yeah. Well.
We have a question from, I think it's Yuki Yamagiwa. Did I get that even closely right? Oh, cool. What's been your biggest struggle as an actress, and how did you overcome that struggle?
I think it's sort of probably my own insecurities, and I think also I remember writing an email to Sarah on Suffragette and being like, I just really want to make sure that everything I do is a really bold choice in the film, because I do think I can have a tendency to appear, if I'm just trying to be authentic, but it can appear passive in film because I'm not, I think sometimes I'm not a kind of skillful film actor. I sort of just try and do things realistically, and then sometimes that doesn't translate to the screen in the way that I want it to. And so I think trying to be, I don't like kind of acting, but I don't want to be on the back foot. So to try and make myself kind of be on the front foot and be active in what I'm bold in the choices that I'm making, that's probably been the biggest thing to try and I feel like on Mad in Crowd and Suffragette that's been better, but it's kind of, that's my ongoing kind of fight with myself.
We have one from Lisa Ross, which I feel confident I pronounced correctly. What are some of the things you did in the beginning of your career to keep the faith when you didn't have the opportunities you have now? Thanks, Heart.
Oh, yeah. In terms of jobs, or in terms of what did I? I did everything when I was younger, so I was incredibly lucky. I didn't have a huge amount of downtime. The first couple of years I worked pretty much all the time, but I did all sorts of stuff, and I was pretty much a corpse in one thing. And Trial and Retribution, I did an episode of that, and I was basically dead. I was dead, and they filmed my murder, but that was it, Wow. And so I was sort of I spent like 5 hours in makeup having an autopsy scar put on me, and then I had to do this bit where this isn't answering your question at all, but I got thrown down a flight of stairs, and then when the stunt woman did it, she landed and her skirt went over her face and her sort of bum was sticking out, and they were like, okay, now Carey, you get on the floor and do that. And I was like, oh man, could she not have fallen with her skirt not over her head?
Yeah.
You know, and then this like incredibly handsome actor, Greg Wise, had to sort of pick me up and carry me up the stairs, you know, with my bum out, and that was my whole job.
Wow.
So I was very, very lucky to not have a lot of downtime, but mainly because I just kind of went for everything I could do.
And what's up next after this, you know, very, very busy?
I actually don't have anything planned. The right thing hasn't come up yet, and I just had a baby, and so I'm kind of going to do that for a while. And
Tell them how long ago you had a baby.
She's 9 weeks old.
I know, right? Well, I always say that we are so grateful to have you here, but with a 9-week-old, we are extra grateful and shocked. Thank you so much for being our guest today. Thank you guys for being a great audience.
Yeah, thank you so much.